My name is Maya Chen, and if you'd asked me 3 months ago what my biggest worry was, I'd have said it was surviving another soul-crushing Monday in the glass and steel cage of Iridian Dynamics. Back then, I was just another mid-level strategist in a sea of navy blazers and rehearsed smiles, grinding out reports no one read and attending meetings that could have been emails. I kept my head down, played by the rules, and told myself that loyalty and hard work would eventually pay off. I was wrong. It all started on a Tuesday, gray skies, stale coffee, the kind of day that feels like it's already over before lunch. I was rushing to the 32nd floor conference room for the quarterly pitch review with the Helios Group, a potential $400 million partnership that Viridian had been courting for over a year. My palms were sweaty, not because I doubted my work. I'd spent weeks refining the strategy deck, but because I knew who'd be leading the meeting, Marcus Thorne. Marcus wasn't just my boss. He was the kind of executive who wore arrogance like a bespoke suit. Sharp jaw, sharper tongue, and a laugh that sounded like ice cracking under pressure. He'd made it clear from day one that he saw me as competent but replaceable, a phrase he'd actually used in my last performance review. Still, I showed up early, stayed late, and never missed a deadline. I thought that counted for something. As I hurried down the hallway, clutching my tablet like a lifeline, I saw Mr. Ruiz, the night shift janitor, struggling near the service elevator. His cart had tipped over, spilling cleaning supplies everywhere, and he was trying to gather bottles while favoring his left knee. I'd seen him around for years. Quiet, always nodding politely, always wearing that faded blue uniform with his name stitched crookedly over the pocket. Rumor was he'd been with Viridian since the building opened, back when downtown was still full of parking lots and dreams. Without thinking, I stopped. "Let me help," I said, crouching down. He looked up, startled. "Oh, miss, no, you go on. Big meeting, right?" I saw the Helios folks arrive. "It'll take 2 minutes," I insisted, stacking spray bottles and mops back onto his cart. That's when Marcus appeared. He stood there in the hallway, arms crossed, his expression shifting from impatience to something colder, disgust maybe. "Maya," he said, voice dripping with mock concern. "Is this really the best use of your time? Helios is waiting. Or have you decided your career aspirations now include floor maintenance?" A few junior analysts walking by snickered. My face burned, but I kept stacking bottles. Mr. Ruiz needed a hand. "It's no big deal. No big deal." Marcus stepped closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "You're embarrassing yourself, and by extension this department, by playing charity case in the middle of a workday. Do you think Helios cares about your bleeding heart? They care about results. About power. Not about mopping up someone else's mess." Mr. Ruiz shrank back, eyes downcast. I wanted to say something sharp, something that would cut through Marcus's smugness like a knife. But I didn't. Because in that moment, I remembered my mother's voice. "Don't let pride cost you your future, Maya." So I swallowed my anger, stood up, and walked away without another word. The meeting was a disaster. Not because of my presentation, I nailed it. The Helios team leaned forward, asked thoughtful questions, even complimented the clarity of our market analysis. But Marcus kept interrupting, talking over me, reframing my points as if they were his own. At one point, he actually said, as Maya was trying to say, like I'd stumbled over basic concepts. I sat there, jaw clenched, watching months of my work get repackaged as his brilliance. Afterward, in the hallway, he clapped me on the shoulder with false warmth. "Good effort," he said, loud enough for others to hear. "Next time, maybe skip the janitorial side gigs and focus on the big picture." I went home that night and cried, not just from humiliation, but from the slow, sickening realization that no matter how hard I worked, Marcus would always see me as less than. Expendable. Invisible. But here's the thing about being invisible. Sometimes, it lets you see things others miss. Over the next few weeks, I noticed little things. Marcus bragging in the break room about how he'd single-handedly secured the Helios deal. Him taking credit for my cost-saving proposal in the executive newsletter. Him scheduling meetings during lunch so junior staff couldn't eat. But the real eye-opener came when I stayed late one Friday to finalize a client report and overheard Marcus on a call in his office. "Look, I don't care about their ESG commitments," he was saying, voice tight with frustration. "Helios wants aggressive growth, not tree-hugging nonsense. Tell them Viridian's community initiatives are just PR fluff. They'll never audit it." My blood ran cold. Because I knew that Helios had made environmental and social governance a non-negotiable pillar of their partnership. Their CEO, Lena Cho, had said as much in her keynote at the Global Sustainability Summit last year. In fact, I'd included a whole section in my original pitch about Viridian's admittedly thin, community programs, including our long-standing contract with local vendors like the cleaning service that employed Mr. Ruiz. Marcus was lying. And worse, he was setting Viridian up to fail. I didn't confront him. Didn't send an angry email. Instead, I did what I'd always done. I worked. Quietly. Carefully. I pulled every document related to the Helios proposal. Cross-referenced Marcus's claims with Viridian's actual policies. Reached out discreetly to contacts in procurement, HR, even facilities. And that's when I found it. A signed letter from Viridian's CEO, dated 2 years ago, pledging to prioritize contracts with minority-owned and long-tenured local service providers. Mr. Ruiz's company was on that list. I also learned something else. Lena Cho wasn't just any CEO. She'd started her career as a janitor's daughter. She'd scrubbed floors in a high-rise office building to pay for community college. And she hated corporate hypocrisy. The final straw came last Tuesday. I was printing handouts for the Helios signing ceremony. Yes, they'd actually agreed to move forward despite Marcus's bluster, when I saw Mr. Ruiz limping toward the loading dock. His knee looked worse. I asked if he was okay. Just old bones, he said with a tired smile. But thank you, Maya. For that day. Not many folks stop. I nodded, but something in his voice made me pause. Mr. Ruiz, how long have you worked here? 23 years next month, he said. Started right after my wife passed. Needed steady work for my girls. 23 years. And Marcus had called him someone else's mess. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing Mr. Ruiz's face, Marcus's sneer, the Helios team's hopeful eyes during my presentation. And I realized, this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about who we pretend to be versus who we actually are. So I made a decision. I spent the weekend compiling everything, emails, policy documents, internal memos, into a single airtight dossier. Not to sabotage Marcus. Not exactly. But to ensure the truth had a seat at the table when Helios signed that $400 million deal. The signing was scheduled for Thursday at 10 a.m. in the Grand Ballroom. Marcus had invited the press, ordered champagne, even rented a custom-engraved pen. He was already drafting his victory speech. But on Wednesday afternoon, I walked into Lena Cho's private office, not as Maya the overlooked strategist, but as Maya the witness. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she didn't thank me, didn't gasp in outrage. She just leaned back in her chair, steepled her fingers, and said, "Tell me more about Mr. Ruiz." I did. And then she asked one question that changed everything. Would he be willing to speak with me? I called him that evening. He was hesitant at first, scared of losing his job, scared of making trouble. But when I told him who'd asked, and why, his voice softened. For her, he said. After what she's done for people like us. Yes, I'll talk to her. The next morning, I arrived at Viridian at 7 a.m., earlier than usual. The lobby was already buzzing with caterers setting up silver trays and photographers testing lights. Marcus strutted past me in a new suit, humming to himself. He didn't even glance my way. I took the service elevator to the 32nd floor. In my bag, I carried 2 things. My original pitch deck, the one Marcus had tried to erase, and a printed copy of Viridian's community pledge, signed by the CEO. At 9:45 a.m., the Helios team arrived. Lena Cho walked in last, calm and composed, her eyes scanning the room like a hawk. Marcus rushed to greet her, all charm and handshakes. "Miss Cho, so glad you could make it. We've been counting down the minutes." She smiled politely. "Mr. Thorne, before we proceed, I'd like to invite someone to join us." Marcus blinked. "Of course. Anyone you'd like." Lena turned to the side door. "Mr. Ruiz." And there he was. The room fell silent. Marcus's smile froze. I watched his face go from confusion to panic as Mr. Ruiz walked in, his uniform crisp, his posture straighter than I'd ever seen it. "Mr. Ruiz has worked at Viridian for 23 years, Lena said, her voice clear and steady. He's also the father of 2 daughters who graduated from state universities thanks to his night shifts and overtime. And last month, Viridian's leadership assured me that their commitment to long-term local partnerships was a core value." She paused, then looked directly at Marcus. "Is that still true, Mr. Thorne?" Marcus stammered something about operational efficiencies and streamlining vendors, but Lena held up a hand. "I've reviewed your recent internal communications," she said, "including your instructions to reclassify community initiatives as non-essential." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The moment everything tipped. Marcus paled. That was taken out of context. Was it? Lena's gaze shifted to me. Maya, would you mind sharing what you showed me yesterday? All eyes turned my way. For once, I didn't feel small. I felt necessary. I stepped forward, my voice steady. Viridian's pledge to support long-tenured local partners isn't just PR, Miss Cho. It's documented policy. And Mr. Ruiz's company has been part of that promise since day one. Marcus tried to interrupt, but Lena cut him off. The Helios Group doesn't partner with companies that treat their values as optional. She turned to the Viridian legal team. I'm putting the signing on hold pending a full review of your compliance with your own stated commitments. The room erupted in murmurs. Marcus looked like he'd been slapped. And me. I caught Mr. Ruiz's eye across the room. He gave me the smallest nod, just a tilt of his chin, but it said everything. What happens next? I don't know yet. Marcus is scrambling, calling emergency meetings, blaming miscommunication. The CEO is furious. HR has launched an investigation. And Lena Cho asked me to stay behind after the chaos settled. You've got integrity, Maya, she said. And spine. Two things this industry desperately needs. I didn't tell her I'd almost quit last month. That I'd updated my resume a dozen times. That I'd believe Marcus when he said I was replaceable. But standing there, watching the man who mocked kindness face the cost of his cruelty, I realized something. Sometimes, the quietest acts of decency echo the loudest. And this story, it's far from over. The next morning, I walked into Viridian, not as the invisible strategist who fetched coffee and took notes, but as someone people actually looked at, really looked at. Not with pity or condescension, but with something new, respect. Or maybe it was just curiosity. Either way, it felt different. My inbox was flooded, not with routine requests for slide edits or data pulls, but with messages from colleagues I barely knew, some thanking me, others asking if I'd heard anything about Marcus's status, a few even slipping in quiet confessions of their own experiences with him. One junior analyst wrote, "You made me feel like maybe I don't have to disappear to survive here." I didn't reply to most of them. Not because I didn't care, but because I was still trying to figure out what I wanted now that the ground had shifted beneath me. Lena Cho hadn't just paused the deal, she'd sent a tremor through the entire company. By noon, the news had leaked to Business Insider. Helios Group halts $400 million Viridian deal over ethical concerns. The article didn't name me, but it quoted an internal source describing a pattern of misrepresentation regarding community commitments. Marcus's name wasn't mentioned either, but everyone knew. He didn't show up to the office that day. By Thursday, rumors swirled that he'd been placed on administrative leave. The official line was pending review, but the real story was in the hushed conversations in the break room and the way executives avoided eye contact in the elevator. On Friday, I got a call from Lena. "Meet me for coffee," she said. Not as a potential vendor. Not as a whistleblower. Just as Maya. We met at a small cafe 3 blocks from Viridian. No suits, no assistants, just 2 women with paper cups and a lot unsaid between them. She wore jeans and a soft-looking sweater, her hair pulled back in a loose bun. She looked tired, but kind. "You remind me of myself 20 years ago," she said after we'd settled in. Bright, capable, and convinced that if I just worked harder than everyone else, they'd finally see me. I stirred my coffee, not sure what to say. "They never do," she continued gently. "Not until you stop asking for permission to exist." I thought about Mr. Ruiz, about how Marcus had reduced him to a prop in his own building, someone to be stepped over, not seen, and how I'd almost done the same by staying silent. "I didn't do it for revenge," I said quietly. "I know," Lena said. "That's why I believe you." She leaned forward. "Helios isn't walking away from this deal permanently, but we're renegotiating on our terms, and we want you at the table." My breath caught. "Me? You understand what this company says it values versus what it actually does. That's rare. And valuable." She paused. "I'm offering you a role on our strategy team. Not as a consultant. As a full-time hire. With equity. With voice." I stared at her, stunned. This wasn't just a job offer. It was an escape hatch. A chance to build something real. Somewhere that didn't treat people like disposable assets. But then I thought of Viridian. Of the dozens of Mayas still trapped in its polished hallways, biting their tongues, shrinking themselves to fit. And of Mr. Ruiz, who'd given 23 years of his life to a company that barely knew his name, until now. "What if I stay?" I asked. Lena raised an eyebrow. "Here?" "After what happened, someone has to make sure the review isn't just theater," I said. "If Helios is serious about holding Viridian accountable, they'll need eyes on the inside. And I think I owe it to Mr. Ruiz, and everyone like him, not to vanish the second things get hard." She studied me for a long moment, Then she smiled. You're tougher than you look, Maya-chan. We shook on it. I'd stay at Viridian, for now, but report directly to her on the compliance process. No more Marcus. No more hiding. When I got back to the office, I found an envelope on my desk. Plain white, no name. Inside was a handwritten note. Thank you for seeing me. R. No title. No flourish. Just those 4 words. I tucked it into my wallet, right behind my ID. The following Monday, the CEO called an all-hands meeting. For the first time in years, he didn't talk about margins or market share. He talked about trust, about broken promises, about how Viridian had lost its way. He announced a new ethics task force and named me as one of its leads. Marcus never returned. But his shadow lingered, in the nervous glances of managers who'd laughed at his jokes, in the sudden enthusiasm for inclusive leadership training, in the way people now held doors for the cleaning staff. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't magic. But it was a start. 2 weeks later, I ran into Mr. Ruiz near the service elevator again. This time, he wasn't picking up spilled bottles. He was standing tall, talking with the head of facilities, a man who'd never acknowledged him before. When he saw me, he grinned. They offered me a seat on the new vendor advisory council, he said almost shyly. Said my perspective matters. It always did, I told him. He nodded, then reached into his cart and pulled out a small potted plant, a peace lily, its leaves glossy and green. For your desk, he said. My wife used to say these thrive on honesty. I took it touched. Thank you. As I walked back to my office, plant in hand, I passed the conference room where Marcus once mocked me. It was empty now, the glass walls reflecting the afternoon sun. I didn't feel triumph. Not exactly. What I felt was something quieter, deeper, the slow, steady burn of dignity, reclaimed, not given. And I knew with absolute certainty that this wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning.